I spend a lot of my time thinking about shows and, other forms of media I consume, and one of the ones I think most about is Neon Genesis Evangelion. Now, that's no coincidence. I mean, it's probably one of the most critically analyzed animes ever. But at the same time, it still has plenty of depth and room left to investigate, which is something that's really amazing about the show, considering it's been around for over 2 decades. But I think I have an interpretation of one of the important arcs in the series. And by that, I'm talking about the episode 24 introduction and, death of Kaworu. I have an interpretation that I feel adds a lot to the show, and I haven't really seen it discussed before. So I'm gonna go off the assumption that it's essentially not been talked about at all. If it has, well, whatever. I still just want to kind of talk about it. The basic and literal interpretation of that whole scenario is that Shinji ultimately has to kill Kaworu because Kaworu is an angel, and Shinji's slightly irritated with him because he feels kind of betrayed by that whole situation. And, that's fine as a basic interpretation, but I feel like, given the fact that the show focuses so much on psychological themes and often has a lot of hidden depth, that you have to interpret that scene on a more psychoanalytical level and from a more symbolic perspective. I don't think that assumption, that baseline interpretation, really sums up why Shinji kills Kaworu. Because the important thing to understand about Kaworu and Shinji's relationship is that Kaworu's treatment of Shinji invalidates Shinji's most basic defense mechanism. What do I mean by that? It's established very early on in the show that Shinji essentially has 2 main beliefs. One is that nobody can really love him, and 2 is that he doesn't need to love anyone. He uses that to keep himself safe from the harm he feels he would suffer if he got close to anyone. And that's, a classic defense mechanism. That's a very normal reaction of someone who's lived the kind of life Shinji has. But the thing about Kaworu is that he, for lack of a better word, to borrow his own words, falls in love with Shinji almost immediately. And Shinji feels something very similar, at least, towards Kaworu. And this really challenges those 2 beliefs. There's no way you can reconcile how Kaworu feels and behaves with Shinji with those 2 beliefs. So Shinji's defense mechanism falls apart. And as we know, in the episodes right after, Shinji basically undergoes an entire mental collapse and has to rebuild himself almost from the ground up because of how destabilized all his defense mechanisms have become. So I don't think Shinji kills Kaworu because Kaworu is an angel. Of course he does, but that's not really a why. Shinji kills Kaworu because if Shinji is going to have that defense mechanism, which he feels he needs to maintain his mental stability, then Kaworu has to be out of the picture. Kaworu has to be gone because Kaworu and that they can't exist together. And Shinji feels that getting rid of Kaworu would get rid of that threat to his assumption about himself and about the world. And to back this up, I kind of I think that something the show itself draws attention to backs this up. In a lot of ways, Kaworu is a parallel to Asuka. Him and Asuka are sort of the primary, not necessarily romantic in Asuka's case, but sexual, and I guess romantic interest to Shinji. And they both have this moment that I think is an intentional symbolic parallel. And that's that one of the most iconic scenes in Evangelion is that of Asuka getting choked by Shinji. And one of the most iconic scenes, at least in the context of Kaworu, is his decapitated, his head floating down. And I think that the choking and the detached head are actually, in a lot of ways, gesturing towards and implying each other, because there's the same sort of detachment between head and body, the same, inability to breathe, the same sort of blank lifelessness that appears in both. I think that that's a very important thing to draw attention to, because in a lot of ways I think this sort of amplifies my point about why Shinji kills Kaworu, because at the same time it's obvious why Shinji does what he does with Asuka, and that Shinji's way of dealing with any sort of attention or feelings on his own part is incredibly unhealthy. I think that viewing it that way adds a whole lot more to the show, especially in those later episodes, and the sort of understanding why Shinji falls apart so much, that I think it's a very, very important interpretation in the context of and analyzing the series as a whole. Anyway, that's just kind of been some thoughts about Neon Genesis Evangelion that I had. Obviously, like or dislike, as, your opinion goes, I guess. Feel free to leave a comment, leave some suggestions. I know these early videos that I'm making aren't going to be of the highest quality. I don't really have the skills or talent to back this up, but I'm learning. And I sort of just want to have these, initial things be little rambles that I can get off my chest, and hopefully you can at least glean some sort of information or entertainment from. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you stick around and listen to me some other time. Alright, thank you.